One back tuning into today's video. We're going to be having a look at weather the next 8 to 10 days in today's video. Looks like high pressure is going to be dominating the weather for much of next week. Going to keep it largely settled and dry, I would suspect. Not sure it'll be all that cold, to be honest. I think the worst of the cold temperatures are going to be pushed off in central eastern parts of Europe. But of course, if we get some clear nights, because of the time of year with the long nights, heat quickly radiates away. So if we were to get 2 or 3 clear nights next week, then it would rapidly start to cool down. There'd be a lot of freezing fog coming along as well. So we're going to have a look at all the details on that in a moment. Before I go on with the video, just talk about the advertising. There's video ads on the web pages at GazWebBiz.com. If you hit play on the video ad, you'll be supporting GazWebBiz.com, and thanks very much for doing that. Gav Shop is open, so if you want to buy any Christmas presents at Amazon between now and Christmas, just click through the Amazon banners in Gav Shop. It'll take you directly to Amazon. You can do your Christmas shopping there as normal. At the same time, GazWebBiz will get a royalty fee on anything you purchase. Thanks very much for doing both of these things. Getting involved with the website, it does make a big difference. Just so the December month ahead forecast, if you're wondering where it's got to, I'm waiting for the charts to update from the Beijing Climate Centre. They're late updating, so as soon as they update, I'll do the December month ahead forecast. If they don't update me the next day or two, I may have to do it without them, but I'd rather have the latest update from the Beijing Climate Centre before I do that. So I'm just going to wait a day or two longer to see whether we get the update. So we're going to start off with the 500 millibar height anomaly flow charts, which will be taking us from the 10th to the 12th of December, and 500 millibars, 8,000 feet, important area in the atmosphere, because that's where we've got high pressure and low pressure developing, and where those areas of high pressure, low pressure are moved around by the jet stream. Red extrapolating to high pressure, blue extrapolating to low pressure. Now the ECMWF here is over on the left of the chart, the GFS is on the right. And look at this, we've got a very intense and extensive area of above average height sitting right over top of the country on the ECMWF for 8 to 10 days time. The low pressure is off into the east of Europe. That's where the coldest of the air will be, I think, on the on the eastern side of Europe, around that area of low pressure. But underneath this high pressure across the British Isles, potentially it could get quite cold if we got some clear nights. We're just going to have to wait and see whether those clear nights do in fact turn up, whether we keep anticyclonic gloom under the high pressure. If you keep it gloomy, then it'll be less cold, but of course it'll be very grey and dreary. The jet stream is running something like that around the trough across eastern Canada, going above the ridge, and then diving south around the trough over eastern parts of Europe. So that's the way that the jet stream is going. We're actually on the mild side of the jet, because we're under the extensive area of high pressure. That's the reason it could potentially get quite cold if that high pressure was to persist. Now the ECMWF has the high pressure in a slightly different position, more east to northeast of the country, and the trough is slightly more to the southeast of Europe, if anything. And with that, we're probably bringing in more of an easterly sort of influence. But models are sort of flirting with this idea that we may set up high pressure over Scandinavia around the middle of December. I'm not sure it's going to come to anything, to be honest. I think it's a bit premature. They're too quickly trying to do it. It may be something we'll look at for later in the month, and perhaps more particularly in January. January is the month that I've always been thinking about for getting an area of high pressure setting up over Scandinavia. But the fact of seeing these sort of ideas trying to take place within the model suites at the moment could just be an indication that that's where things are heading in the very long term. But I think the ECM idea of having the high pressure sitting right over the top of the country as opposed to the GFS taking up to Scandinavia is probably the way to go on this particular scenario through next week. So the GFS temperature ensembles, and remember the red line is where we should be at this time of year, showing that we're quite mild at the moment in terms of the upper air. It is excuse me, it is cooler down on the surface, of course, under the high pressure, but we're going to be turning cold later this week, and there's the drop in the temperature turning very cold briefly at the end of the week, with all members of the ensemble going well below the red line. Then under the area of high pressure, everything starts to warm up again in terms of the upper atmosphere. The lines are all picking up, and we eventually go above the red line early next week. And then we get a bit of a scatter taking place through to the middle of December, and these colder members that you're seeing here are just the ones that are taking the high pressure up to Scandinavia, bringing in that easterly wind. But you'll see that many members of the ensemble actually do not do that and keep it quite mild in terms of the upper air. But of course, down on the surface, under a winter high pressure, it will always be colder than it is in the upper atmosphere. There is a bit of scatter there, so we can't totally rule out the idea, but we take the high pressure up to Scandinavia next week and bring in that easterly wind. But I do think it's probably an unlikely development. Temperature anomalies for the next week, taking us from the 3rd to the 10th of December, show that we're going to be colder than average for much of the country, as we will across most of Europe. The milder temperature anomalies are up across Scandinavia and into the west of Russia. That's where we've got red colours, but most of Europe actually going to be in for quite a cold week, and particularly in the east and the southeast Europe, where it's going to be very, very cold, particularly next week. So this is the generic GFS chart for this morning, and yeah, we're seeing this northerly wind coming down across the country on Thursday the 5th. That's when the northerly sets in. You'll really notice that. Could bring snow showers to the north and the east later on Thursday. I've got a cold front dropping southwards, so that could turn wintry on the back edge across England Wales. Probably won't amount to too much, but we've got to keep an eye on it. I'll probably update the Snowwatch page tomorrow when this comes into the time frame of the higher resolution models. Now, eventually, we're going to find that high pressure sort of sitting over the country as we move through into Friday and Saturday. There it is on Saturday, building back in. So very quickly, we cut off that northerly flow. The northerly pushes off into the east and the northeast Europe around that area of low pressure. And the high pressure is just sort of sitting there. And we're bringing some slightly modified, less cold air around the top of the high pressure of the Atlantic. It's still pretty chilly. The weekend will be chilly, but I don't think it'll be as cold as at the end of the week. And there's the high pressure sort of sitting there as we move through into the weekend, into the start of next week. No real change. The mildest temperatures will be in the north and the west, the coolest in the south and the southeast. That's where we're closest to that ridge of high pressure. And of course, if we get fog developing, then it could be really quite cold indeed. Moving out beyond that, a week's time, there's the high pressure sort of sitting over the country. In fact, it's inflating and intensifying. But as we go through to the middle of next week, the midnight run of the GFS wanted to take that high pressure up towards Scandinavia, as we saw on the 500 millibar height anomaly charts, and eventually bring in this sort of east to southeasterly flow. As I say, I'm not sure about that. It could come off. It could bring in that. We could bring in this east to southeasterly wind later next week. But I think it's probably a bit premature. It's probably too quick to do that. I think the basic idea will be that we'll keep the high pressure more or less over the country through next week. Probably turning increasingly foggy and frosty would be my suspicion about what happens. But we can't, as we saw in the GFS ensembles, we can't totally discount this idea of bringing in an easterly wind next week. And if we do bring in an easterly, because it's so cold across Eastern Europe with this trough of low pressure, there will be cold air available on that easterly wind. So we certainly have to keep an eye on it, but I wouldn't rate the chance that highly. Here's the ECMWF. We've got the northerly wind coming down across the country on Friday. As I say, we're going to have to update the Snowwatch page tomorrow when that comes into the higher resolution time frame. I think we're just looking at snow shower. I don't think there'll be anything too disruptive at all. And then as we go into the weekend, the high pressure sort of builds in. We cut off the northerly flow. That's going off into the east of Europe. So the high pressure is just very dominant as we go through into the start of next week. It's milder in the north and the west, bringing up this southwesterly flow. So temperatures will probably be above average across Scotland and Northern Ireland, but further south across England and Wales, close to the high pressure, we're keeping it mainly dry and perhaps quite cold, particularly if we've got fog developing. And then, as with the GFS, the ECM inflates the high pressure through the middle of next week. Big and intense area of high pressure sitting there across many central western parts of Europe next week, and it just goes on through to day 10, which is Friday the 13th of December. The high pressure is just sitting there over the country. It's trying to reach towards Scandinavia, but it's not doing it. And I think this is probably a more sensible idea for what's going to happen next week. That high pressure just sitting there, keeping it very dry, and probably turning increasingly cold as we get frost and fog developing increasingly through next week. But I don't think we'll bring in that easterly wind that the GFS wants to bring in just yet. It's too soon for that. I'll be looking for that later in December and more particularly in January. Finally, the GEM, quick whiz through these charts, best but normally at the end of the week. High pressure builds in, cuts off but normally, that goes off in east of Europe, so definitely got that pattern pinned down. Temperatures will lift up a little bit, but it'll still be quite chilly over the weekend and into next week. Very little change really, but high pressure stay dominant. Do bring up this southerly to southwesterly flow. That'll bring milder air to the north and west in particular. The south and the southeast closest to that high pressure, probably having the coolest of the weather. And eventually the high pressure, by the time we get through to day 10, Friday the 13th, is just sitting there, more or less over and starting to the east of the country. Again, it's not desperately cold, but because it's a winter high, and the nights are long, the heat radiates way through the night, particularly if the skies are clear. It probably, with that high pressure, turns very gradually and increasingly colder through next week, with a growing risk of frost and fog. So I think that's what we're looking at, a very prolonged spell of settled weather after the northerly comes down at the end of the week. Temperatures will lift up a little bit after the northerly. It'll become somewhat milder, particularly in the north and the west, early next week. But high pressure goes on through most of next week. Don't think it'll get to Scandinavia and bring in that easterly wind, but we do have to watch it just to see whether it could happen. But I think really the idea is high pressure, very dominant next week, and probably increasingly frost and fog will become a problem and the story through next week. So that's it. I'll be updating the Christmas, doing another Christmas update on my events page this evening, so come back for that. 5-day forecast tomorrow. And as I say, the December month-ahead forecast will be turning up at some point this week. Hopefully when the Beijing Climate Centre updates at any time. That's it for now. Thanks for watching.